Welcome to The Pause, the key to wisdom, hosted by The Kitchen Table, where we explore ways to respond wisely to life's challenges. If you're looking for ways to navigate life with more maturity, empathy, and insight, you've come to the right place. In our work together, we've discovered a formula for wisdom. It's a do-it-yourself project, so pull up a chair with your co-hosts Greg Coughlin, Ron Medved, and Dave Dirksen as we share our models, practical exercises, and many good stories. Let's get into it. Hi, welcome back to the kitchen table and our exploration of wisdom and wise responses to life's challenges. In episode 3, we shared a couple of examples of wise responses and wisdom that we'd experienced in others. And we talked a little bit about what those elements were and what impressed us about that and what created benefit in those situations. And so today we're going to pick up where we left off, and we're going to explore a little bit more about what was happening under the hood or behind the scenes with these people who demonstrated wisdom. In other words, what did they do with the pause? Because they both demonstrated a constructive pause. In other words, they were not active, but they were active in their minds as they built a wise response. And so today in episode 4, we'll share what we think was going on behind the scenes or under the hood in those wise responses. And so we'll try to describe what that constructive pause is made up of and what's going on in there. So we're here today again with Greg and Ron, and guys, welcome. And do you have any introductory remarks as we get into actually describing what's going on in that constructive pause?
Dave, if I could, just as we were preparing for this, I went back and listened to episode 3. And the two stories that we told were one about an Indigenous elder that intervened in a facilitation, and then in another situation in Ron's story where there was an elder, but Dr. Glenn Terrell, a wise owl, intervened, but without any action. And so we talked about it this morning, what took place there a little bit, just in the episode 3 for the listener to refresh themselves.
Well, in your story, Greg, your elder was in the room, but was not an active participant. Back of the room participant, listening, and you had the responsibility for leading the group, but your elder came on, if I remember right, the beginning of the next day, and kind of laid down some rules for the group, and basically said, you better listen, you better participate. In my situation, it was somewhat the same. I had a wise elder, Dr. Terrell, that was in the room, and he was quiet, the first day, but in the middle of the second day, he didn't speak up to the group, but he found a way to get a message to me, who was leading the workshop, to basically stop leading the workshop and just be quiet. Let them be in action themselves. And my story, my example included them actually taking leadership of the workshop themselves. The participants actually finished out the workshop.
Yeah. And then to your credit, Dave, for this point, is that when we began the Wisdom Project, we had defined wisdom as the experience and knowledge adding up to creating better decision making. But at the end of the day, Dave, you kept on reminding us of the importance of the wisdom has to have benefit. And my view of the two gentlemen intervention and wise intervention was it had a constructive outcome. And so it led us to this formula. And I think just for the listener or the viewer, this little red X on beside the wisdom is the measurement of wisdom is wise response, which creates benefit. So today's podcast or episode today.
So today we want to look at what we believe goes on behind the scenes as we pause searching for wisdom and a wise response. And so we're going to take an introductory look at this core wisdom formula and what the three big elements are that we think add up to the opportunity to demonstrate wisdom, to demonstrate a wise response. And then we're going to just briefly foreshadow even more depth in terms of the constructs that we have developed that explain a little bit more about what's happening behind the scenes in experience and knowledge and maturity and wisdom. And so this core wisdom formula we'll describe today, and then with a little bit of a teaser, we'll share briefly the construct that we will explore in depth in coming episodes. Yeah, and so with that core wisdom formula of experience and knowledge and maturity adding up to the opportunity to demonstrate wisdom, we have created 4 supporting constructs. So there's the wisdom practice model that gives a little bit more insight and practical assistance with describing or interpreting your experiences such that you can understand them more objectively. There's also the maturity capabilities construct, in which we get into much more depth regarding the ways that we can develop and hone our maturity such that we can use our knowledge and our experience to deliver a wise response. We also have a model that helps us to understand some of the things that interfere with our ability to behave wisely and things that may cause us anxiety, etc. And that's the SCARF model that we'll get into in some depth. The SCARF model is not ours. It's from David Rock. And then finally, we'll also add a construct which helps us to understand in more depth what wisdom looks like, when it's about knowledge and when it's about situational response. And so that's wisdom to the third power. We won't say any more about that at this time. But anyway, those are the 4 constructs that help to support the core wisdom formula. And they're extremely practical. They've been designed so that you can look at them and immediately get into a little bit of your own personal work in terms of understanding how you can model wisdom more consistently.
Yeah. So thank you, Dave. So one of the things that we try to be able to do is make complex simple. And so if you double click on the core formula, we can double click, we get the 4 constructs, and we double click, we get to even more detail. But as you said, Dave, we'll keep it pretty simple. We also find benefit in telling stories to be able to illustrate. And so we told the 2 stories of the 2 gentlemen. Now let's unpack that a little bit for the listener. Anybody want to take a crack at, if we look at the formula and say what was actually going on there, whether it was the Indigenous elder or whether it was Dr. Glenn Terrell, what did you see? What did, there was a wise response or no response that created benefit. So we meet the threshold of a success intervention. But now what took place, and maybe it would help to express a little bit of experience, knowledge, and maturity. Maybe that might also be helpful to explain what that means.
Well, let me go first here, and I'll use this formula as part of my response to your question, Greg. I'm just to remind everybody, I was facilitating a workshop with a group of, I think it was, 15 scientists in a room, and I was leading them through an exercise. I wasn't talking about their expertise necessarily, but I was talking to them about the psychology of change. And so our goal was to come up with a new mission statement for the Hanford nuclear project over in Eastern Washington. But to cut to the chase, it was a 2-day workshop, and it was almost noon on the second day. We, in my mind, and again, that's important, in my mind, we were not making enough progress. I wasn't getting enough in writing, for example. We weren't, drawing enough conclusions yet. And so I was an experienced facilitator. I had a certain amount of knowledge and maturity, to be doing this role, but the stress started rising in my body. The pressure was on. The deadline was fast approaching, and I wasn't confident and clear. All the more reason that it was a blessing to have Dr. Terrell in the room, who was silent, and he came to the rescue. And I think his solution, to my workshop issue was simpler than any I could have ever thought. Basically, he coached me to do nothing, because as he was reading the room, the 15 participants were getting ready to sort of take the work on themselves and to finish the process that we had started. And it wasn't my job to finish the process; it was their job to finish the project. So again, I think what I saw in Dr. Terrell's wisdom was knowing when you'd done enough, and that the responsibility should not be yours to continue along the same path, but to actually give it over to the group. So that was one thing that I got out of my experience.
And what I see there in that example of wisdom from Glenn is that he had processed his experience as a facilitator and as a person working with groups, and he was able to form a belief about what made experiences effective and successful. And he was able to look at the cultural aspects, maybe of what that group needed. Maybe he was thinking about the psychology, the science behind what would create a good outcome. He was using some kind of filters to process his own experience in that pause as he was silent. Then he was using his knowledge of facilitation techniques, etc., and really processing what the ultimate goal was. And then he brought a level of maturity that he helped you to also model, which was that he was able to get himself out of the way. He was able to engage in objective self-analysis, to say, I'm not the most important one here. The group is. And he looked at various possible solutions and perspectives that might be at play in the room, and he settled on one that was very effective, the perspective of the scientists as needing to take hold of this as people of action, of people of competence. And so I just think there's an example of the experience, knowledge, and maturity just writ large in that story that led to his wise response, which was inaction, but it created benefit.
Yeah, well said, Dave. What strikes me on this, if I look at your scenario, Ron, there's a relationship between three parties, essentially Ron facilitating, Dr. Terrell advising, and then the participants participating. And the knowledge that the participants had of academic scholars, scientists, probably had a tendency to impair their behavior, because they're clearly the smartest one in the room. Your experience of facilitation was probably the strongest in the room, but what the maturity that you may have not come across was just I'm going to look stupid, if this doesn't go right. So at 11:45, I bet you were feeling the pressure of, this could mess up. So it dawned on me that there are, and then if we focus on Dr. Terrell's experience in being, because he was well into his 90s or probably 80s when you were working with him, weren't you, Ron?
That's right.
And so his experience was deep, his knowledge was wide, but his maturity was, the context is, Dave often reminds us of, is the context is there's something bigger here than me. This is something more important than me. And so it's interesting how the formula could be used to diagnose.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good description, Greg. And I was busy doing the work of being a facilitator. So being busy, I was not thinking about, I was not getting out of the box in my thinking. I mean, probably one of the last things I was thinking about was the answer here was to just be quiet and let the group do what they were doing. And as I described in the previous episode, they were moving the flip charts around. They were taking control of the workshop, which if you're a facilitator and you see that happening, of course, you're going to initially react, negatively to that. But Glenn was right there to, so to speak, tap me on the shoulder and say, relax. It's happening as it should. Let them go. Let them take control of this. And so I just needed that reminder, and I quickly got on board with what was happening in the room.
And just if I focus in on the facilitator, a story raced through my head when I was back in the 80s, when I took my first master facilitation certification, big name and the instructor, I recall, his name was Don Hatcher, and he had us facilitate a problem. And in the facilitation, the problem, the facilitator knew the answer, but the participants didn't. And so as we were facilitating, somebody would identify the problem and we would want to wrap up. We've got it. And he stood behind the group and he kept up holding this annoying sign, "What's the problem?" And he was ingraining in me that as a facilitator, you might see the problem, or part of the group might see the problem, but if the whole group doesn't see the problem, you can't move forward. And so I was thinking, this is where the problem that Dr. Terrell saw was potentially ownership. That was the problem. They didn't own it. And as soon as they stood up and took the chart and the markers, they owned it. And then you could step away. But the tendency for a facilitator is to still hold on to the reins and try to steer it where they think it should go, even though that's counter to what you're supposed to do. So it's fascinating. And the thing that struck me is that Dr. Terrell, in his sort of afternoon of life, didn't get all fussed over ego or self-gratification or ego gratification. He just sort of meandered into seeing the clarity of the problem or the solution. So that's very cool.
Yeah, it was, and it was so natural, the way that it unfolded, and wisdom was served, that day, and the responsibility for birthing wisdom came from everybody in the room, but in different ways. Dr. Terrell, I say, come to the rescue, but he's brought his wisdom to the party. The scientists in the room, they all had something to share, and moving towards a solution, which in this case was the creation of a new mission statement for the project. And again, my main job, I was a facilitator, and my job was to provide them with new information that would make it easier for them to kind of come to a new conclusion together. And so I had done my part, or I was doing my part, but there came a time where I don't know, maybe it was musical chairs. I mean, we changed leadership in the room over the course of a relatively short period of time, and that was the way to the end result, because we did in fact come up with the mission statement by the end of the day, the second day.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use the term that his wisdom seemed natural, and that's often what it looks like. It looked like sort of like a bolt out of the blue. Wow, this person just said the exact right thing and got us back on track or whatever. But what we know about the pause is that it's not something that is, I mean, it can come quite spontaneously, but it has all of this background that's gone on with reflecting on experience, even subconsciously, and bringing deep knowledge to the situation, not just sort of a surface set of things that you think you know, but actual deep knowledge. And then all of these components of maturity, getting yourself out of the way, your own analysis, your acknowledgement of other people's perspectives as legitimate, and your comfort with ambiguity. And so all those things coalesce in this constructive pause to allow that wisdom to seem natural. But it is definitely something that is complex, and it's something that takes some practice, mental practice, to be able to integrate all of those things to become capable of sharing wisdom more consistently.
Yeah, I'm just reminded, of one element of the workshop that had gone on the first day, especially, was, I had these 15 individuals. I had them broken into groups. I had them into small group discussions. They had an opportunity to sort of voice their opinions on things that we were looking at, and so there was this process that was well underway. They were getting a chance to express themselves and in the process. And I contrast that, to another situation. Might have been somebody might have been the strongest voice in the room and could have been dominating the conversation, and felt really good about sharing their opinion. But my job as a facilitator was to make sure that there was equal time on the microphone, so to speak, and to make sure everybody, had a participation. So that was something that also went on. But at the end of the day, and the kind of the high point in this example is Dr. Terrell, since the room, since what was going on, and in his own way, he interjected himself silently, almost, because he only talked to me. He said, "Ron, let them go. They got the ball. Let them go ahead and finish this project."
When as you're talking, I'm sort of replaying my storyline of the elder that sat in the back of the room and then intervened and scolded essentially the participants. Funny in the story, I don't remember me getting scolded, but maybe I should have, I don't know. But, when I look at the dominant contribution of the wise response, it came from both the experience, knowledge, and maturity of the elder. if I be self-critical, my experience was reasonably developed. My knowledge in facilitation and group dynamics was fairly high, but I was young and my maturity wasn't. And then when we look at the participants, they probably were experienced in their community, but had growing knowledge, and so limited in knowledge and limited in maturity. And so, when you put those three dynamics together, if you didn't have a wise owl in the room, that's probably why the meeting may not have achieved its outcomes, because my competencies or capabilities, knowledge, wisdom, and maturity, or experience, knowledge, and wisdom, and maturity, pardon me, and their group was that's in a certain position as well. So no wonder lots of meetings don't achieve outcomes, because just think about the dynamics between not having a facilitator, just having a command and control leader that it's my way or the highway, or you work in it's participatory and you're in a state of chaos. So it's really intriguing about how this would apply to groups, not just yourself.
I'm picking up on a couple of things here. One is that it's not an either or proposition. We've shared two stories where the wisdom was obvious and very positive and had really like tipped the balance between maybe not the greatest outcome and a really, really good outcome. So it created benefit. But I'm also picking up on the two of you in those stories, because you're actors in there who have a degree of wisdom. You've got a lot of experience, and you have a lot of in terms of facilitation and working with the groups you were working with. You really understood their culture, their dynamics, and so you had experience. You also both had lots of knowledge about facilitation strategies and what was effective, and you also knew that you were trying to help them to achieve an outcome, that it was not your outcome, it was theirs. So you were acting as a servant leader, and so that and you had knowledge of that, and you knew how to do that. So those were both in very long supply, deep wells of experience and knowledge. You also had degrees of maturity. You weren't totally immature. You were engaging in some self-analysis. How am I doing here? How is this working? You were really aware of what the perspectives were of the other people in the room. Ron, you described how you were already facilitating in a way that shaped the group dynamics such that there was equity, etc. So you had that. And so you were, even without those elders there, I think you were creating benefit. It's just that there's a spectrum. We all are doing the best we can with wisdom and wise response. We're creating as much benefit as we're capable of at that time, and so but nobody's got ultimate or infinite experience, knowledge, or maturity. And so you're able to be wiser, but in this case, there was someone else in the room who showed you that there was an even wiser response. And so I want to point out that you did demonstrate wisdom, and then the other person in the room helped by showing even more wisdom, because their pause had been more constructive and more extended and maybe deeper. So it's not an either or proposition. It's kind of like the spectrum. We're doing the best we can. We're creating the greatest benefit that we can. What do you think about that?
Well, Dave, I think that's really good observation on your part. Sometimes you're not able to see it if you're a participant in the action. You need to be focused on your own role in the group dynamic, but that's just what happens.
Ron, give us some thoughts in your sort of wrap up. We've covered off the two different stories, and Dave just did a nice job of summarizing sort of the takeaways from it. What are you thinking? And we've got up on the slide slide the full constructs and the core wisdom formula, but we simplified it into a document that looks something like this. Where are we at in episode 4? Bring it to a close.
Well, I think where we're at is, simplest thing that comes to me is that, wisdom is, and practicing wisdom is got a few moving parts to it, and it's more complex than we think. However, we're more well practiced in wisdom than we think sometimes, and I think one of the things that is very natural to all of us is the pause, or in the case of our story, is being able to allow someone to influence us into a pause, and take us to wisdom in a faster way. So Dave kind of took us down that path.
Yeah. And what I take away from today is the luxury that we had of telling stories from the past and using them as a tool to understand how was wisdom enacted. And there was experience, knowledge, and maturity in different combinations. But where we're going that I'm excited about is now double clicking on what about the wisdom practice model and how does it play a role in this? What about the wisdom of the third power and how does it play a role in? And then really a key, we really emphasize the maturity capabilities in our project, and we're excited about how does that play a role in development of wisdom. And then, of course, the work from Dr. David Rock and his SCARF model. So more to come on this, and if you can keep this sort of in your head, this model and the 4 constructs, more to come on this as we go forward. Dave, anything to wrap up?
No, if you take a look at the construct, you can imagine that it's going to take a few episodes for us to get into some depth with each of those, and we'll go through them and clarify what looks fairly complicated into some simple practices.
Thank you, Dave. Well, once again, thanks for sitting in on the kitchen table. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks for joining us at the kitchen table today. We hope you're leaving with a few useful insights, and we'd love to hear from you. So please leave your comments and questions below. There's more to come, so we'll see you again. Be well.